Mark loved fishing, especially at night. There was something peaceful about sitting alone by the water, the world quiet around him. He had heard rumors about Black Hollow Lake, stories about people disappearing and strange sightings, but Mark was a skeptic. To him, it was just another fishing spot. On a chilly Friday night, he grabbed his gear and flashlight and headed to the lake. The air was unusually still, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and his own footsteps. When he arrived, the lake looked like glass, reflecting the crescent moon perfectly. He found a spot near an old dock, set up his rod, and cast his line. For an hour, nothing happened. Not even a nibble. He started to think the trip was a waste. But then, the line tugged hard. Mark's heart raced as he gripped the rod, struggling to reel in what felt like the catch of a lifetime. His muscles strained, and the reel creaked under the pressure. Finally, out of the water emerged, not a fish, but an old, torn net. At first, Mark was annoyed. But then he saw it, a hand, pale and bloated, tangled in the net. The fingers were curled around a rusted hook, and the skin looked like it had been underwater for years. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He dropped the net, watching as it sank back into the dark water. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, and started packing up his gear. "This isn't worth it," he muttered, his voice shaking. As he turned to leave, he heard a soft splash, followed by the sound of water dripping. He froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Slowly, he turned the beam toward the lake. There, standing in the water, was a figure. Its body was shrouded in shadows, but its eyes glowed faintly, staring straight at him. Mark ran, his heart hammering in his chest. But just as he reached the tree line, he felt a cold, wet hand gripping his shoulder. Jake and Ryan were best friends and loved fishing together. One weekend, they decided to try a spot Ryan had read about online. It was deep in the woods, miles from civilization. The journey was long, the road bumpy, and by the time they arrived, the sun was setting. The river was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no birds, no insects, just the sound of water gently flowing. They set up their rods and waited, joking around to pass the time. Hours went by, and nothing bit. Jake was about to suggest packing up when his rod jerked violently. "Dude! I've got something big," he yelled, gripping the rod tightly as it bent under the strain. Ryan cheered him on, but the line was so taut it looked like it might snap. Finally, with one last pull, Jake reeled in his catch. What came out of the water wasn't a fish. It was a creature unlike anything they'd ever seen, jet black, slimy, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce right through them. It writhed on the ground, making a low, guttural noise. "What the hell is that?" Ryan whispered, inching closer. Jake didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the creature. Against Jake's protests, Ryan reached out to touch it. The second his fingers brushed the slimy surface, Ryan froze. His body stiffened, his eyes wide with terror, and then he was gone. No flash of light, no sound, just gone. Jake screamed his friend's name, his voice echoing through the woods. He looked around frantically, but there was no sign of Ryan. Then he heard a deep, guttural laugh, coming from the river. He turned back, and the creature was gone. But the glowing eyes? They were still there, staring up at him from beneath the water. Tom's favorite fishing spot was a secluded bend in the river. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the stress of everyday life. Early one morning, just before dawn, he set out with his gear. The air was crisp, the river calm, and everything seemed perfect. But as he approached the riverbank, he noticed something strange. The water looked darker than usual, almost black, and the air was colder than it should have been. He shrugged it off and set up his rod, eager to start fishing. The first catch came quickly, a large, silvery fish. Tom was thrilled. As he reeled in more, each fish seemed bigger and shinier than the last. But something felt off. The fish didn't flop around like normal, they just lay there, staring at him with glassy, unblinking eyes. Then it happened. His rod bent sharply, the line pulling so hard it nearly yanked the pole out of his hands. Tom fought with all his strength, his heart racing. Finally, he pulled up the catch. It wasn't a fish. It was a grotesque, human-like creature. Its body was covered in slimy scales, but its face was disturbingly human. Its eyes locked onto Tom's, and it spoke in a voice that chilled him to the bone. "You shouldn't have come here." Tom dropped the rod, stumbling backward. The creature didn't move, but its eyes followed him as he scrambled to his feet. He didn't stop running until he reached his car, his heart pounding in his ears. That night, as he lay in bed, he swore he could hear the river's gurgling voice whispering, "Come back."